Chapter 2 of A Phantom Lover by Vernon Lee. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. I feel that I cannot possibly reconstruct my earliest impressions of Mrs. Oke. My recollection of them would be entirely colored by my subsequent knowledge of her, whence I conclude that I could not at first have experienced the strange interest and admiration which that extraordinary woman very soon excited in me. Interest and admiration, be it well understood, of a very unusual kind, as she was herself a very unusual kind of woman. And I, if you choose, am a rather unusual kind of man. But I can explain that better anon. This much is certain, that I must have been immeasurably surprised at finding my hostess and future sitter so completely unlike everything I had anticipated. Or, no, now I come to think of it, I scarcely felt surprised at all. Or if I did, that shock of surprise could have lasted but an infinitesimal part of a minute. The fact is, that having once seen Alice Oke in the reality, it was quite impossible to remember that one could have fancied her at all different. There was something so complete, so completely unlike every one else, in her personality, that she seemed always to have been present in one's consciousness, although present, perhaps, as an enigma. Let me try and give you some notion of her. Not that first impression, whatever it may have been, but the absolute reality of her as I gradually learned to see it. To begin with, I must repeat and reiterate over and over again that she was, beyond all comparison, the most graceful and exquisite woman I have ever seen, but with a grace and an exquisiteness that had nothing to do with any preconceived notion or previous experience of what goes by these names. Grace and exquisiteness recognized at once as perfect, but which were seen in her for the first time, and probably, I do believe, for the last time. It is conceivable, is it not, that once in 1,000 years there may arise a combination of lines, a system of movements, an outline, a gesture, which is new, unprecedented, and yet hits off exactly our desires for beauty and rareness? She was very tall, and I suppose people would have called her thin. I don't know, for I never thought about her as a body, bones, flesh, that sort of thing, but merely as a wonderful series of lines, and a wonderful strangeness of personality. Tall and slender, certainly, and with not one item of what makes up our notion of a well-built woman. She was as straight, I mean she had as little of what people call figure, as a bamboo. Her shoulders were a trifle high, and she had a decided stoop. Her arms and her shoulders she never once wore uncovered. But this bamboo figure of hers had a suppleness and a stateliness, a play of outline with every step she took, that I can't compare to anything else. There was in it something of the peacock, and also something of the stag. But above all, it was her own. I wish I could describe her. I wish, alas! I wish, I have wished 100,000 times I could paint her as I see her now if I shut my eyes, even if it were only a silhouette. There, I see her so plainly, walking slowly up and down a room, the slight highness of her shoulders just completing the exquisite arrangement of lines made by the straight, supple back, the long, exquisite neck, the head with the hair cropped in short, pale curls, always drooping a little, except when she would suddenly throw it back and smile, not at me, nor at any one, nor at anything that had been said, but as if she alone had suddenly seen or heard something, with a strange dimple in her thin, pale cheeks, and the strange whiteness of her full, wide-opened eyes. the moment when she had something of the stag in her movement. But where is the use of talking about her? I don't believe, you know, that even the greatest painter can show what is the real beauty of a very beautiful woman in the ordinary sense. Titian's and Tintoretto's women must have been miles handsomer than they have made them. Something, and that the very essence, always escapes, perhaps because real beauty is as much a thing in time, a thing like music, a succession, a series, as in space. Mind you, I am speaking of a woman beautiful in the conventional sense. Imagine, then, how much more so in the case of a woman like Alice Oke. And if the pencil and brush, imitating each line and tint, can't succeed, how is it possible to give even the vaguest notion with mere wretched words, words possessing only a wretched abstract meaning and impotent conventional association? To make a long story short, Mrs. Oke of Okehurst was, in my opinion, to the highest degree exquisite and strange, an exotic creature whose charm you can no more describe than you could bring home the perfume of some newly discovered tropical flower by comparing it with the scent of a cabbage rose or a lily. That first dinner was gloomy enough. Mr. Oke, Oke of Okehurst, as the people down there called him, was horribly shy, consumed with a fear of making a fool of himself before me and his wife, I then thought. But that sort of shyness did not wear off, and I soon discovered that, although it was doubtless increased by the presence of a total stranger, it was inspired in Oke not by me, but by his wife. He would look every now and then as if he were going to make a remark, and then evidently restrain himself and remain silent. It was very curious to see this huge, handsome, manly young fellow, who ought to have had any amount of success with women, suddenly stammer and grow crimson in the presence of his own wife. Nor was it the consciousness of stupidity, for when you got him alone, Oke, although always slow and timid, had a certain amount of ideas, and very defined political and social views, and a certain childlike earnestness and desire to attain certainty and truth, which was rather touching. On the other hand, Oke's singular shyness was not, so far as I could see, the result of any kind of bullying on his wife's part. You can always detect, if you have any observation, the husband or the wife who is accustomed to be snubbed, to be corrected by his or her better half. There is a consciousness in both parties, a habit of watching and fault-finding, of being watched and found fault with. This was clearly not the case at Okehurst. Mrs. Oke evidently did not trouble herself about her husband in the very least. He might say or do any amount of silly things without rebuke or even notice. And he might have done so, had he chosen, ever since his wedding day. You felt that at once. Mrs. Oke simply passed over his existence. I cannot say she paid much attention to anyone's, even to mine. At first I thought it an affectation on her part, for there was something far-fetched in her whole appearance, something suggesting study, which might lead one to tax her with affectation at first. She was dressed in a strange way, not according to any established aesthetic eccentricity, but individually strangely, as if in the clothes of an ancestress of the 17th century. While at first I thought it a kind of pose on her part, the mixture of extreme graciousness and utter indifference which she manifested towards me, she always seemed to be thinking of something else, and although she talked quite sufficiently, and with every sign of superior intelligence, she left the impression of having been as taciturn as her husband. In the beginning, in the first few days of my stay at Okehurst, I imagined that Mrs. Oke was a highly superior sort of flirt, and that her absent manner, her look, while speaking to you into an invisible distance, her curious, irrelevant smile, were so many means of attracting and baffling adoration. I mistook it for the somewhat similar manners of certain foreign women, it is beyond English ones, which mean, to those who can understand, pay court to me. But I soon found I was mistaken. Mrs. Oke had not the faintest desire that I should pay court to her; indeed, she did not honor me with sufficient thought for that; and I, on my part, began to be too much interested in her from another point of view to dream of such a thing. I became aware, not merely that I had before me the most marvellously rare and exquisite and baffling subject for a portrait, but also one of the most peculiar and enigmatic of characters. Now that I look back upon it, I am tempted to think that the psychological peculiarity of that woman might be summed up in an exorbitant